On Thanksgiving morning, inside the sprawling, historic Gilded Age estate of the Sterling family in Newport, Rhode Island, the savory aroma of roasted turkey sage and freshly baked pecan pies had mingled in the air since dawn. Across the expansive, manicured lawns, the stone steps were still slick with morning frost. Inside the main house, daughters-in-law and aunts bustled around, transferring fine china and silver platters to the grand dining room. Alara Vance had been wearing her apron since 5 in the morning, meticulously arranging artisan cheeses and fruit on a massive charcuterie board for the family's customary holiday gathering. Even though she hadn't slept a wink the night before, no one bothered to ask how she was doing. To everyone else, she was simply the sole daughter-in-law of Alistair Sterling, the billionaire patriarch of the family conglomerate and the wife of Theron Sterling. The pear slices need to fan outward. You've been a daughter-in-law for 2 years. How can you still not know something this basic? The eldest aunt snapped. Alara immediately lowered her head. I'm sorry, Auntie. I'll fix it. Even though it was just a misplaced slice of fruit, Alara had to apologize as if she had brought shame to the entire bloodline. As she quietly rearranged the fruit, the eldest aunt clicked her tongue loud enough for the relatives sitting nearby to hear. Well, what do you expect? A working-class country girl who suddenly marries into a family like this obviously has a lot to learn. It's a good thing Corinne Theron's mother is kind enough to guide her. Alara said nothing. In the beginning, whenever she heard comments like that, her face would burn, and at night she would cry silently under her blankets. But now she had learned not to respond. If she argued, she was disrespectful. If she tried to explain, she was making excuses. If she smiled, she was immature. If she looked gloomy, she was accused of ruining the family's holiday spirit. In the end, the safest expression Alara could choose was blankness. Across the great hall in the gentleman's parlor, the men were drinking single malt scotch and discussing corporate acquisitions and real estate. Sitting right in the center of them was her husband, Theron Sterling. Wearing a tailored charcoal suit, he answered his relatives' questions with concise, calculated precision. As an executive director of a Boston-based industrial equipment firm and the primary heir to the Sterling empire, every word he spoke was flawless. When someone made a joke, he merely quirked the corner of his lips. When the conversation shifted back to business, his face turned cold and serious again. Theron never once glanced in his wife's direction. That no longer surprised Alara. They had driven down to Rhode Island in the same car, but their conversation during the 2-hour drive consisted of only 3 sentences. Put your seatbelt on. We don't need to stop at a rest area. Don't make weird faces in front of my parents. Theron only ever spoke when strictly necessary. If asked if he had eaten, he nodded. If asked if he would be home late, he would frown and ask if Alara was keeping tabs on him. In his daily life, there was room for the company, his parents and Vespera, but there was no place for his wife. Just before the patriarch was set to give the customary Thanksgiving blessing, the sound of a car pulling up to the main gate echoed outside. It was impossible for a guest to arrive late on a day like this, so everyone momentarily ceased their activities. The heavy oak doors opened, and the sharp click of stiletto heels echoed into the grand hall. The first person whose face hardened wasn't Alara, but Theron's mother, Corinne. Vespera Thorne stood there, wearing a chic black designer dress, layered under a cream-colored cashmere trench coat. Vespera's appearance was far too modish and frigid for a family Thanksgiving. Despite being the center of attention for dozens of staring relatives, she didn't look nervous in the slightest. Instead, she seemed poised, as if she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. I apologize for the intrusion. Corinne stood up, her voice razor-sharp. Where do you think you are barging in here? As if expecting Corinne's reaction, Vespera pulled a white envelope from her designer bag. Then she looked at Theron. Her gaze was a mix of sorrow, disappointment, and a firm conviction she wanted to display. I didn't come here because I wanted to, but it seems Theron needs to make a decision today. Theron slowly stood up. Vespera, go home. If I go home, you'll just avoid me again, won't you? We'll talk later. How long is later going to be? Vespera's voice rang through the hall. The relatives began to whisper, and Alistair Sterling's face instantly turned to stone. Alara set down the silver lid in her hands. A sickening feeling began to creep from her fingertips. Vespera pulled a sonogram photo and a hospital document from the envelope. I'm pregnant. Instantly, every sound in the mansion died. Only the faint clatter of pots from the distant kitchen could be heard. Vespera continued, her voice trembling slightly. This is Theron's child. I'm 9 weeks along. The eldest aunt covered her mouth in shock. Corinne marched up to Vespera and snatched the documents from her hand. Alistair glared at Theron with a deadly stare and demanded in a terrifyingly low voice, "What is the meaning of this?" Theron looked at the ultrasound photo. A brief flash of shock crossed his face, but he quickly hardened his expression. He didn't ask Vespera if it was true, nor did he deny it or call her a liar. To Alara, that silence was clearer than any verbal answer. Crueler than the fact that Vespera was pregnant was the reality that her husband did not look at his wife. Theron didn't check Alara's expression once. He acted as if Alara wasn't even in the room, or even if she was hurt, it wasn't something worth considering. Corinne rushed over to Alara in a panic. This might not even be true. Don't misunderstand. Hearing the word misunderstand, Alara gave a short, hollow smile. Over the past 2 years, she had heard "don't misunderstand" countless times. She wasn't allowed to misunderstand. Even when her husband left the house in the middle of the night after receiving a call from Vespera, she had to believe it was just business. Even when a photo of them standing side by side at a corporate gala was published in an online business journal. Even when she found out her husband had gone on a business trip with Vespera on their wedding anniversary, she was told she was just being too sensitive. Alara looked down at the ring on her left ring finger. The ring Theron had slipped onto her hand on their wedding day, which had never been a promise of love. Slowly, she took it off. "What are you doing?" Corinne asked, startled. Without answering, Alara walked toward the grand dining table. Amidst the faint scent of roasted herbs and cinnamon, she placed the diamond ring on an empty spot next to a silver platter. The sharp clink of the cold metal sounded deafeningly loud. Only then did Theron look at Alara. Alara Vance. It was the first time he had used her full maiden name. Looking straight into her husband's face, Alara asked with eerie calmness, "How much longer do I have to repay this family's debt? What are you talking about? My father saved your father's life. That's why I became a daughter-in-law in this house. The debt you owe is to my father. But why am I the one who always has to pay for it?" Alistair intervened, his face rigid. "Alara, today is a day of giving thanks and family unity. Let's have this emotional discussion later." Later, Alara repeated the word. "Conversations about me are always later. After my husband's corporate affairs are done, after the family events are over, after protecting the elders' pride. But I don't know when that later will ever come." Theron stepped forward and reached for her wrist, but Alara stepped back. Perhaps because the gesture felt so foreign to him, Theron's hand froze in midair. His wife, who usually always came when called, apologized when he was angry and waited exactly where he left her, was now avoiding his touch for the first time. Alara looked at the sonogram in Vespera's hand, then turned to Theron. "I won't ask why you can't deny it right now. Just answer me one thing." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. "During my time in this house, was I ever, even for a moment?" Your wife, Theron, couldn't answer. In that heavy silence, Alara remembered the day 2 years ago when she was bound to this family. Summer in the Berkshires of western Massachusetts was humid and thick. Sunlight splintered over the sprawling farmlands nestled in the valleys, and rain clouds always seemed to hang heavy over the distant mountains. Alara's parents grew organic vegetables and operated a small apple orchard. Though they didn't make much money, their hard work was enough to sustain their modest life. Her father, Silas, was known in town as a quiet but profoundly reliable man. He helped others as if their problems were his own, and he didn't have the heart to demand money from folks who owed him. Her mother, Maeve, though often exasperated by her husband's gentle nature, faithfully stood by his side tending the orchard. The connection between Alistair Sterling and Silas Vance began 20 years ago, during a freak summer storm that caused massive flash flooding. At the time, Alistair, who was just expanding his empire, was caught in the deluge on his way to meet a client. His luxury SUV skidded off a mountain road and plunged into a rapidly swelling ravine. Silas, who happened to be driving his truck nearby, risked his own life to pry the crushed door open and pull Alistair out just before the vehicle was submerged. Silas never bragged about it. Even when the townsfolk called him a hero, he simply said, "I just helped a man out of a jam." But to Alistair, it was different. Every time his business reached a new height, he would visit Silas's home trying to send extravagant gifts and checks during the holidays. Silas accepted the pies and hams, but always returned the money. "If I take a check for saving a life, it feels like I'm doing business." Hearing that, Alistair felt even more indebted. Alara had seen Theron a few times when he accompanied his father to the Berkshires during their childhood. Theron was 6 years older than her, quiet, wearing crisp, expensive clothes like a proper city boy. But he had once reached out his hand to help her up when she tripped near the creek. She held on to that brief, fleeting memory for a long time. But as adults, they lived in entirely different worlds. Alara studied culinary arts at a community college in Boston, then returned to the Berkshires with a dream of opening a bakery using her parents' harvest. Theron, after studying business at Ivy League schools and abroad, entered his father's company and skyrocketed up the corporate ladder. When Alara saw Theron's photo in online financial journals, the boy who had offered her a hand by the creek seemed entirely erased. The man in the photos looked polished, icy, and entirely unbothered by the feelings of others. The talk of marriage began after Silas collapsed in the orchard. Leading up to his emergency coronary bypass surgery, Alistair secured a spot at Massachusetts General Hospital and offered to cover every astronomical medical bill. Silas refused, but Alistair didn't back down. That day, in the stark white hospital corridor, Alistair first brought up the marriage to Alara. "There's something I've been thinking about for a long time. It would be a blessing if you and Theron built a life together." At first, Alara thought she had misheard. "Your father and I are closer than blood. I've watched you grow up, and I trust you'll take good care of our family." Alistair spoke warmly, but his words carried a weight that was impossible to refuse. In a situation where they were accepting a life-saving medical handout, Alara couldn't simply say no. Furthermore, her mother Maeve viewed becoming a Sterling as a miraculous stroke of luck. "Theron is such an impressive man. If you marry into a family like that, you'll never struggle for the rest of your life. Mom, you don't get married just to avoid struggling. Love is supposed to. Love can grow over time. Do you think your father and I were madly in love on day one?" Maeve squeezed her daughter's hand earnestly. "You know how bad your dad's heart is, and you know our finances. They want to accept you as their daughter-in-law. Where else will you find people this generous?" Alara had no answer. No one said she was being forced, but the entire situation was funneling her down a single path. She met Theron again at a quiet, upscale New England tavern in Boston. After the parents exchanged pleasantries, they deliberately left the two of them alone. Theron just stared at his whiskey glass, never once making eye contact with Alara. "Reject this marriage." That was the first thing he said to her. Startled, but keeping her composure, Alara asked, "You don't want this either, do you? I already have someone else I'm going to marry." That was the first time Alara heard the name Vespra Thorne. Theron explained he had been dating Vespra since business school and they planned to marry. However, Alistair and Corinne fiercely opposed Vespra, believing she didn't love Theron but was merely after the company and the wealth. "My father is using you to get rid of Vespra. If you accept this marriage, I will probably hate you for the rest of my life." His words sounded less like a threat and more like a grim warning. Alara's heart felt heavy. "Then you should be the one to reject it directly. If I say no, your father will stop paying for my dad's medical treatments. My father isn't that kind of man." "You don't know my father." Theron finally looked straight at her. "And my parents won't give up so easily. Do you think they'll just believe a girl from a working-class family would willingly throw away the chance to marry a Sterling?" His words sharply pierced her pride. "Please don't speak about my parents that way. If you're offended, prove it. Reject the marriage." Alara didn't give an answer that day. With her father's surgery looming, she lacked the courage to say she would refuse all help. But she also wasn't sure if walking into a marriage knowing Theron hated her was the right thing to do. In the end, accepting the marriage was Alara's own choice. No one held a knife to her throat but her father's failing health, her parents' desperate hopes, Alistair's overwhelming debt of gratitude, and a faint childhood memory of Theron tethered her to it. Above all, Alara foolishly believed that with time, Theron would acknowledge her. She thought that if she kept showing him genuine care, his heart would eventually open. On their wedding day, Theron didn't smile once. In front of hundreds of guests and cameras, he played the role of the perfect groom. But when they were finally alone in the bridal suite, he said coldly, "Don't expect me to act like a husband after today." Alara placed her white-gloved hands neatly on her lap. "I won't expect anything. I also won't break up with Vespra." The words were designed to make her give up immediately, but she simply bowed her head and replied softly, "Just please don't hurt my parents' pride in front of others." Theron let out a scoff of disbelief. "So, in the end, all you care about is your family's pride." "Yes. You're here because of your family's pride too, aren't you?" For the first time, he had nothing to say. After marrying, they moved into a private luxury townhouse in Beacon Hill, Boston. The house had high wrought iron gates, massive bay windows, and exorbitant modern furniture. But to Alara, it felt more foreign than a hotel. Corinne offered to hire a live-in housekeeper so her daughter-in-law wouldn't be burdened, but Theron refused. "I don't like strangers in my house." Consequently, all the household chores naturally fell to Alara. Theron handed her a platinum credit card for living expenses and casually mentioned that every transaction alert would be sent to his phone. "Only buy what's necessary. Don't waste money on useless things." Alara felt humiliated, but she took the card. She had no income of her own. At her parents' urging, she had quit her bakery job right after the wedding. At first, whenever she bought groceries or daily necessities, she collected the receipts. She explained her expenses even when Theron didn't ask, and if she put an expensive item in her cart, She would eventually put it back. One day when she bought flu medicine and Midol for menstrual cramps together, Theron called, "What exactly did you buy at the pharmacy to ring up that much?" Alara instantly tensed as if she had committed a crime. "I'm not feeling well. If you're sick, go to a doctor. Don't buy random over-the-counter drugs. A doctor's visit costs more. Do you think I'm doing this because I don't have the money?" He was angry, and Alara apologized without fully understanding why. After hanging up, she realized she had no idea if her husband wanted her to be frugal or not. The money wasn't the issue. Whatever she chose, she had to explain herself and seek his implicit permission. Theron almost always came home late. For the first few months, Alara prepared dinner every night. She learned to cook the beef bourguignon and seared scallops he preferred and set the dining table flawlessly. But the food would just go cold on the marble counter. "I made dinner. What time do you think you'll be home?" When she called, Theron usually answered with a deeply irritated tone. "Did I say I was eating at home?" "No, but just in case." "Don't keep calling me over a just in case." After that, Alara never called again. She would send a text, and if there was no reply, she ate alone. Eventually, she stopped preparing food for herself altogether. Eating alone in a house where her husband never returned felt far too pathetic. Theron's parents adored Alara. Corinne bought her designer bags and clothes, and Alistair was satisfied because Theron seemed more stabilized after his marriage. But even that love was conditional. Even knowing her son was in the wrong, Corinne would say, "Men get quiet at home when they have a lot of work. You need to be softer with him, Mom." I think Theron is still seeing Vespera. That girl just won't let him go. "You have to take control of the situation." "What am I supposed to do, Mom? Make the house feel warm so your husband's heart doesn't wander. Cook his favorite meals, don't nag." Alara tried to believe those words, that if the house was warm, he would come back. That if she was just a little better, Theron would end things with Vespera. So she learned his favorite recipes, ironed his dress shirts herself, and left the porch light on when he worked late. But Theron found even the porch light annoying. "I told you not to wait up for me. I just left the light on. It's the same thing as waiting." From that day on, Alara turned off every light before going to bed. She bought a small black notebook. The cover was plain, small enough to fit in her palm. Initially, she bought it to jot down the foods Theron liked and disliked. But at some point, the contents of the notebook shifted. Don't call late at night. Don't ask if he's eating dinner first. Don't look at his phone even if Vespera's name pops up. Don't offer opinions on his corporate work. Don't show the in-laws that our marriage is failing. When spending money, pick the cheapest option. Don't call my parents in the Berkshires too often. If I need to cry, cry where Theron isn't. Alara treated them as absolute rules. She believed if she followed them, there would be no arguments. But in reality, the more rules she added, the less space she had to exist inside that house. On their first wedding anniversary, Alara baked a small cake. She used wild elderberry syrup she brought from home and decorated the frosting with fresh red berries. She didn't expect a grand celebration. She only hoped they could sit across from each other at the dining table and just talk for the first time. Theron came home past 11 at night. His trench coat smelled faintly of an unfamiliar perfume. "Do you know what today is?" Alara asked. Theron took off his shoes and checked his watch. "I have a board meeting tomorrow morning. Today is our first anniversary." He looked at the cake on the table. For a fraction of a second, he looked like he might feel guilty. But then he said coldly, "I have no intention of celebrating this marriage." Alara's fingertips went numb. "Can't we just have one slice?" "Alara." Theron massaged his temples as if utterly exhausted. "I told you from the beginning. Don't assign your own meaning to things and then get hurt when I don't play along. That is not my responsibility." He walked straight upstairs. Alara stood in front of the table for a long time. Eventually, without even lighting the candle, she put the cake in the fridge. 3 days later, as she threw away the molding cake, she doubted for the first time how long she had clung to a useless hope. Even so, she couldn't give up easily. She felt a sense of responsibility because she chose this marriage, and she couldn't bear to look like a failure to her parents. Most of all, the shadow of the young boy who had reached out his hand to her still lingered in her heart. She believed that person wasn't entirely gone, just buried deep down. Then one winter evening, Theron brought Vespera home. Alara was in the kitchen simmering a hearty clam chowder. Hearing the front door open, she peeked her head out, a rare spark of gladness in her chest. But she froze when she saw the two of them. Vespera's hand was casually looped through Theron's arm, and he didn't pull away. "We had some corporate documents to review, so we're stopping by," Theron explained, though his tone wasn't asking for permission. It was the voice of someone dictating a settled fact. Vespera slowly looked around the townhouse and smiled. "Cozy. Much nicer than I expected." "Alara decorated it," Theron said flatly. I just organized things a bit at a time. The house was a wedding gift from Theron's parents, Alara said. She understood the underlying barb in Vespera's comment, but only nodded. Vespera looked at the simmering pot on the stove. Wow, perfect timing. We haven't had dinner yet. Theron took off his coat without looking at Alara. Just set up something simple. Alara stared at her husband for a long moment. Theron furrowed his brows, clearly uncomfortable with her gaze. What? Nothing. She returned to the kitchen. She divided the food meant for 2 into 3 bowls and brought out extra sides. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the ladle twice. During dinner, Vespera dominated the conversation with corporate jargon, acquisitions, shares, hedge funds, things Alara couldn't understand. Theron, who rarely spoke a word to Alara, explained things in long, engaging sentences to Vespera. When Vespera made a witty remark, he even offered a genuine faint smile. Alara sat across from them, quietly watching. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen her husband smile from this close. Vespera tasted a spoonful of the chowder and praised it. This is phenomenal. You're so lucky Alara is such a great cook. I am completely hopeless in the kitchen. Theron replied with utter indifference. She stays at home all day. She has plenty of time. That single sentence reduced all of Alara's labor to nothing. Waking up at dawn, cleaning the massive house, organizing the holiday catering list sent by her mother-in-law, calling the hospital to schedule her dad's checkups, grocery shopping, and spending hours over a hot stove, all of it became something she just did because she had plenty of time. Vespera smiled at Theron. Still, I'm jealous. Coming home to someone cooking and waiting for you. Theron's expression tightened for a moment, but he quickly poured water into his glass and said, When you get used to it, you don't even notice. Thank you, though. Alara set down her spoon. She didn't know if that thank you was meant for her or for Vespera. But one thing was clear, the most unnecessary person at this table was her, the one who made the food. After dinner, Vespera and Theron sat side by side on the living room sofa staring at a laptop screen. Their shoulders were practically touching. While washing the dishes, Alara intentionally turned the faucet on full blast. She hoped the sound of the rushing water would drown out their laughter, but Vespera's bright giggles kept piercing through. When she finished the dishes, she walked out to see Vespera adjusting Theron's tie. Don't wear this one tomorrow, go with the navy silk. You have that major pitch, remember Alara stopped in her tracks. As his wife, she didn't even know his schedule for tomorrow, but Vespera knew exactly which tie he should wear. Theron saw Alara and said, Make us 2 cups of espresso, please. Alara looked at him for a second, then asked quietly, Can I have a cup and sit too? Theron looked up as if he'd heard the most bizarre question. We're discussing work. I'll just sit quietly. I won't say a word. Why would you need to? That short question shattered Alara's heart. When a wife simply wanted to sit next to her husband, he asked why she would need to. Alara forced a smile. You're right. Why would I need to? She set the 2 espressos in front of them and walked upstairs. As soon as her bedroom door closed, her legs gave out. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she covered her mouth with her hands to muffle her sobs. Downstairs, their conversation flowed seamlessly. Vespera said something and Theron chuckled softly. Listening to that laugh, she pulled the small black notebook from her nightstand drawer. She wrote a new rule. When my husband is with the woman he loves, do not intrude. Beneath it, she added one more line. Do not hope that if I endure this, he will eventually understand. The tip of her pen stopped on the paper. She stared at the sentence she had just written for a long time. Until now, all the rules in the notebook were meant to keep Theron from getting angry. But this final sentence was different. It was the first warning directed not at her husband, but at herself. Enduring doesn't make you loved. Suffering in silence doesn't make others feel guilty. When someone receives another person's sacrifice for too long, they don't realize its weight. They assume it's their inherent right. Alara wiped her tears and closed the notebook. That night, even after Vespera left, Theron did not come up to the master bedroom. When the living room lights went out and the house was swallowed by darkness, Alara lay alone in bed staring at the ceiling. She didn't know if the boy who had reached out to her by the creek and the man who had just seen another woman out the door were the same person. Perhaps people don't change over time. Perhaps we just choose to remember the version of them we want to see. Under the covers, she touched the wedding ring on her left hand. It was still there, but strangely, it felt infinitely heavier. She wasn't ready to leave yet. She lacked the courage to tell her parents the truth, and she wasn't strong enough to admit her marriage was a failure. But for the first time that day, Alara thought, if I vanished from this house, who would notice first Theron, my in-laws, or the credit card company sending the daily transaction alerts? The fact that no immediate answer came to mind kept her awake for a very long time. From that day on, Ilara stopped waiting for Theron to come home. When evening fell, she only cooked enough for herself. The silver cutlery she always meticulously arranged on Theron's side of the table was now tucked away in a drawer. She didn't leave the porch light on, and even if she heard the rumble of a luxury car pulling into the driveway late at night, she didn't open her bedroom door. Theron didn't notice the changes for the first few days. The house was still immaculate, his shirts were pressed, and the fridge was stocked with meal prep. But one early morning, returning from a corporate function, he stood silently on the pitch-black porch for a long time. In the past, no matter how late he arrived, there was always a warm lamp left on in the corner of the living room, and he often found Ilara asleep on the sofa under a throw blanket. That day, there was no one. Theron turned on the lights himself, drank a glass of water, and went upstairs. When he opened the bedroom door, Ilara was sleeping with her back to him on the edge of the bed. Unconsciously, he stepped closer to check if she was truly asleep. She didn't move an inch. Ilara, Theron called out softly. No response. In the past, Ilara would wake up just from the sound of his footsteps. She would bring him warm water, ask if he was exhausted, and check which suit he needed for the morning. Theron, who used to find all of that incredibly irritating, suddenly felt the house was far too quiet without it. He stood there for a moment, then closed the door and walked out. Only after the door clicked shut did Ilara slowly open her eyes. While pretending to sleep, her palms had grown sweaty. The fact that fear preceded any sense of comfort when her husband approached her felt utterly pathetic. She felt herself becoming a strange, neurotic person in this house. Her mood swung wildly depending on Theron's tone of voice, and her heart raced whenever her phone buzzed. Even when he wasn't mad, she was already formulating apologies in her head. One day, Ilara stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. Her bare face was pale, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. The bright, smiling girl in her pre-wedding photos felt like a total stranger. She pulled the black notebook from the drawer, then shoved it back in. She refused to add another rule. She felt that the more rules she obeyed, the less safe she became. She was just forgetting who she was. It was around this time that Ilara decided to go back to work. At first, she looked for remote jobs. She thought about selling her baked goods or artisanal syrups online. But she was terrified of registering a business and using the home address without Theron's permission. Eventually, she found a job opening at a quaint artisanal bakery in Cambridge, across the river. The shop was called the Hearthstone Bakehouse. It was a renovated historic brick building, and the glass display cases were filled with treats like elderflower, cream brioche, dark chocolate pâtes de crème, and heritage apple tarts, using local farm ingredients. Just looking at the photos online, she stared at the screen for a long time. This is what I want to do. The next day after Theron left for the office, she took the tea across town. The moment she opened the bakery door, the warm scent of toasted butter and rising dough enveloped her. Behind the register, a man in his mid-30s was prepping dough. When Ilara mentioned she was there for the job listing, he dusted the flour off his apron and smiled politely. I'm Lorcan. Do you have experience? I went to culinary school in Boston. And I worked at a bakery briefly before I got married. Married Lorcan glanced at her left hand. Ilara looked down at her ring and answered softly, yes. Lorcan seemed to sense her hesitation and didn't press further. Instead, he led her to the kitchen and said he wanted to do a quick, practical test. Ilara had brought a small jar of the wild elderberry syrup her mother had mailed from the Berkshires. She whipped up a delicate chiffon sponge, filled it with elderberry-infused mascarpone cream, and sprinkled candied walnuts on top. Her hands hadn't worked professionally in a long time, but the moment she touched the ingredients, muscle memory took over. As she weighed the flour and checked the oven temps, a vitality she hadn't felt in years returned to her face. Lorcan tasted a slice of the finished cake and fell silent for a moment. Ilara grew anxious. Is it missing something? No, quite the opposite. Lorcan set the plate down and smiled. With skills like this, there isn't much I can teach you. He asked, can you start next week? Ilara was thrilled, but after checking the hours and pay, she hesitated. Is there a problem? No, it's just that my house is a bit far. The shift is 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., so the commute should be fine. And rotating weekends off. Finally, she nodded. I'll take it. On the train ride home, Ilara found herself smiling. How long had it been since someone acknowledged her talent? In the Sterling family, her cooking skills were treated as a basic requirement for a daughter-in-law. To Theron, it was something she did simply because she stayed home all day, but Lorcan called it a skill. Ilara didn't tell Theron she had gotten a job. She was afraid he would forbid it, and she didn't want to doubt a decision she had already made by having to defend it. She woke up early, finished the household chores, and took the train. She returned in the late afternoon, prepped dinner, and cleaned up so Theron wouldn't notice a thing. Working at Hearthstone was an entirely different world. The staff didn't see her as the wife of an executive, or the Sterling family's daughter-in-law. They treated her as a swift, reliable coworker with an incredible palate. Ilara's elderberry chiffon cake quickly became a massive hit with the regulars. When a customer ordered 10 boxes for a corporate gift, Lorcan wrote the baker's name on a small chalkboard next to the display case, Elderberry Chiffon, crafted by Ilara Vance. Ilara stared at the writing, unable to look away. Why did you put my name? The creator should be proud of her work, shouldn't she? You didn't have to broadcast it. Why not? It's nothing to be ashamed of. Ilara couldn't answer. After getting married, she had almost never heard her own name spoken. At her in-laws, she was Theron's wife or daughter-in-law. At corporate galas, she was introduced as the director's +1. Even Theron only used her name when he was furious. Seeing her name written out in chalk felt strangely overwhelming. That night, looking at her reflection in the subway window, she looked different. Though physically exhausted, her eyes were alive. She promised herself that with her first paycheck, she would send a small gift to her parents and buy a linen apron she had her eye on. But the secret couldn't be kept forever. One Friday afternoon, Theron was driving through Cambridge with Vespera. After a pitch meeting nearby, Vespera mentioned a trendy new bakehouse and insisted they stop. Theron wasn't interested, but since they had time before their next meeting, he followed her inside. The bell chimed as the door opened. Ilara, who was folding pastry boxes behind the counter, looked up. Instantly, the smile vanished from her face. Theron stopped dead in his tracks. Ilara was wearing a crisp white button-down with a tan apron, her hair tied neatly back. The woman who moved like a ghost through their home with a perpetual look of gloom was now smiling naturally, warmly greeting customers. The sight was incredibly foreign to Theron. Vespera approached the counter first. Ilara, what are you doing here? The customers in the shop glanced over, suppressing her rising panic. Ilara answered calmly. I work here. By my own choice. Did Theron approve this? At that question, Theron's face tightened. The implication that his wife needed his permission to work in front of a room full of people made him deeply uncomfortable, yet he didn't defend her. Since when? About 2 months. 2 months. Theron's voice dropped an octave. Without telling me. Ilara, anticipating his anger, gripped the edge of her apron. I figured you would forbid it if I asked. So you lied. I never lied. You just never once asked what I do all day, did you? Theron was rendered speechless. Lorcan stepped out from the kitchen, assessing the tension. Is there a problem here? Ilara quickly intervened. It's fine, Lorcan. Theron looked Lorcan up and down. The way this man looked at Ilara with concern deeply irritated him. You own this place, I do. And you are her husband. Theron stated it much louder than necessary. Lorcan gave a curt nod. I've heard the stories. That single sentence struck a nerve. You've been talking about me. Ilara shook her head. I only said I was married. Vespera watched the friction with immense amusement. She pointed at the chiffon cake in the case and said brightly, Theron, look, the sign says Ilara made this. Let's try a slice. Theron didn't respond. Ilara placed a slice of the cake on a ceramic plate and set it before him. She tried to hide her trembling fingers, but Theron noticed. Try it, she said. Is this really the time? It is, since this is the first time you've ever acknowledged my work. Ilara looked him dead in the eye. In the past, she would have looked away first. Not today. Theron finally picked up a fork and took a bite. The tartness of the berries and the rich velvet cream melted together perfectly. It was infinitely better than he had anticipated. But he offered no praise. How much longer are you planning to do this? I intend to keep working. Are you lacking something at home? I'm not doing this for the money. Then why? Ilara thought for a moment before answering. Because I don't want to forget that I'm a person who is actually capable of doing something. Theron frowned, unable to comprehend her meaning. Vespera, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, grabbed Theron's arm. We're running late. Let's go. Theron wanted to order his wife to quit on the spot. But with the staff and customers watching, he swallowed the words. We'll talk at home. As he turned away, Ilara unknowingly let out a massive breath. That night, Theron came home earlier than usual. Ilara was waiting on the sofa. She fully expected him to demand she quit, and she had prepared her defense. Theron took off his coat and asked, What's your salary? Roughly. Ilara told him the hourly rate. Theron gave a look of pure disbelief. You commute across the city every day for that kind of spare change. To me, it's not spare change. You have my card. Every time I swipe that card, the notification goes straight to your phone, doesn't it? What's the problem with that? Ilara stared at him and replied softly, I have to explain myself when I buy aspirin. I have to justify sending a box of fruit to my parents. If I have my own money, at least I don't have to ask for permission just to exist. Theron's face hardened. When did I ever ask you to get permission? There are things that are understood without being spoken aloud. Once again, you're talking like you're the victim here. At that, Alara's eyes wavered. But this time, she didn't apologize. Have you ever stopped to think about who made me the victim? What, nothing? Elara stood up. Theron grabbed her wrist. Why are you walking away in the middle of a conversation? Alara looked down at his hand, gripping her wrist. Theron assumed she would cower, but Alara calmly peeled his fingers off. I have an early shift tomorrow. You're actually going back to that bakery, yes. What if I forbid it? Alara paused for a second before answering. I'll still go. Theron stood frozen, hearing a defiance he had never heard from her before. Alara walked past him and climbed the stairs. From that day on, Theron developed an abnormal obsession with his wife's job. When he finished work, he checked to see if she was home. If she was late, he demanded to know what time her shift ended. He convinced himself it was about family pride and security. But one day, when he happened to park his car across from the bakery and saw Alara laughing freely with Lorcan, he realized the feeling wasn't just concern. Lorcan was carrying a heavy sack of flour and Alara held the door for him. They exchanged words and laughed simultaneously. The radiant smile blooming on Alara's face was something Theron had never once witnessed at home. He watched them from his car for a very long time. He felt a deep, twisting irritation. Why was the woman who was always a ghost in his presence laughing so brightly with that man? The fact that there was a side of Alara he didn't possess enraged him. Theron got out of the car and strode into the shop. Alara was startled. What are you doing here? I had a meeting nearby. It was a lie. When Lorcan greeted him, Theron only gave a stiff nod. He ordered a pastry and sat at a corner table by the window. Hyper-aware of his gaze, Alara continued working, taking orders, boxing pastries, handing a complimentary cookie to a toddler. Theron watched it all in silence. Alara was a vital needed person in this space. Customers knew her name by heart, coworkers asked for her input, and Lorcan bounced new menu ideas off her. At home, she was a person meant to remain invisible. But here, the more she exerted her presence, the more she was valued. Theron felt an inexplicable gnawing anxiety. When her shift ended, he approached her. We're leaving together. I was going to take the tea. Why take the train when the car is right here? I figured you might have a dinner with Vespera. Alara said it so casually that Theron's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you mocking me? No, because that's what usually happens. Lorcan watched the exchange from behind the counter. Theron bit his tongue and grabbed Alara's bag. The drive home was suffocated by a heavy silence. Theron broke it first. Are you close with that guy? He's the owner. I know that. I'm asking why you're so close. Because we laugh together. Alara looked out the window and added smoothly. People laugh when they talk sometimes, but you never laugh when you're with me. When those words landed, Theron himself was taken aback. Alara slowly turned to look at him. Has there ever been anything I've done that made you smile? Theron had no words. Alara turned her face back to the window. In the glass reflection, her face was expressionless, but her eyes held a weariness that had been festering for years. A few days later, while making breakfast, Alara was suddenly hit by an intense wave of nausea. Just the smell of the frying bacon made her gag, and she nearly collapsed onto the kitchen floor. Initially, she thought she was just overworked, but then she realized her period was weeks late. Before her shift, she stopped at a CVS and bought a pregnancy test. She paid for it with her own debit card, so no alert would ping Theron's phone. In the cramped employee restroom at the bakery, her hands shook violently as she waited for the lines to appear. 2 lines. Alara stared at the plastic stick, forgetting how to breathe. A rush of emotion she couldn't differentiate between sheer joy and paralyzing terror filled her chest. She placed a hand over her stomach. In this freezing house, a new life tethered to her was growing. A visit to a local clinic confirmed it. The doctor warned that because it was early, she needed to avoid stress and physical exertion. Looking at the tiny flicker on the ultrasound monitor, she cried, "Is your husband not joining us?" the nurse asked gently. Alara shook her head. "He's busy with a corporate merger." The lie slipped out so easily. Leaving the clinic, she thought about calling Theron immediately. Regardless of how broken their marriage was, he had a right to know. A small, desperate part of her even hoped that this news might finally change him. But she slowly lowered her phone. She refused to use a baby to chain her husband to her. She wanted to tell him face-to-face properly. Coincidentally, Theron's birthday was in a week. Alara decided to cook a special dinner and break the news then. She bought a pair of tiny white baby booties embroidered with little yellow ducks. She placed them inside a small gift box, along with the sonogram photo and a short note. Even though this child comes from a marriage you didn't want, I hope at least this baby can be loved. After writing it, she thought about it and crossed the last part out. It felt like passing her own trauma onto the baby before it was even born. Instead, she wrote, "Our family is growing." On his birthday, Alara cooked his favorite meals and baked a flawless cake. She remembered the anniversary cake she had thrown in the trash, but she wanted to believe things would be different tonight. By 8 p.m., Theron still wasn't home. Alara texted, "Can you come home early tonight? I have something to tell you." No reply. At 9 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was a text from Vespera. "Can we meet for a drink? I have something important regarding Theron." Alara initially ignored it, but Vespera immediately sent a photo. A sonogram. The phone nearly slipped from Alara's hand. Vespera had sent the address of a swanky hotel lounge near her bakery. After agonizing over it, Alara put her coat on. She felt that if she didn't confirm it herself, she would imagine far worse things all night. Vespera was sitting by the window sipping a mocktail. As soon as Alara arrived, she smiled. "You look terrible. Should I order you a tea? What did you want to show me?" Vespera pulled a hospital envelope from her Birkin bag. "The photo I just texted you." Alara didn't sit down. "Whose child is that?" Vespera paused, then answered with brutal simplicity. "Theron's." Alara gripped the back of the velvet chair. "Don't lie to me." "Why would I lie? Theron never denied it." Vespera gave a bitter smile. "What exactly did he tell you?" The question was surgical and cruel. She pushed a clinical document across the table. Alara couldn't focus on the text. Her vision blurred and a loud ringing filled her ears. 9 weeks. Alara remembered her own timeline. It was almost exactly the same. Does Theron know? He knows. But the board is finalizing his promotion to CEO soon. A messy divorce right now would cause stock issues, so he's waiting for the right moment. Vespera looked at Alara's left hand. "Let's be honest. Your marriage is a sham. Theron loved me from the start. No matter how well you play the perfect housewife, that fact won't change." Alara fought the urge to touch her own stomach. She refused to let Vespera know she was pregnant too. "So what do you want from me?" "Divorce him," Vespera said softly but firmly. "This baby needs a father." Something inside Alara shattered. The baby in my stomach needs a father too. But she couldn't say it aloud. The moment she revealed she was also pregnant, both unborn children would become pawns in a twisted game to trap a man. Alara stared at the documents, then stood up. "I'll hear it directly from my husband. Do you think he'll be honest with you? I'll be the judge of that." When she got back to the townhouse, the frosting on the cake had begun to melt. The food on the table was ice cold, sitting next to the small gift box. Theron finally arrived near midnight. Alara was sitting in the dark living room. As soon as he opened the door, he noticed his wife's rigid posture. "You're still up. Where were you?" "The office." "Did you meet with Vespera?" Theron hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Briefly. For work." Alara pulled her phone out and showed him the sonogram Vespera had sent. "Is this work too?" The color drained from Theron's face. "Where did you get that?" That reaction alone made Alara's heart plummet. "It was true. I'm looking into it." "Looking into what? If it's true, if she's actually pregnant, we don't have proof it's mine yet." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Theron loosened his tie, looking exhausted. "Why would I tell you something that isn't confirmed? I am your wife." Suddenly, the title of wife is important to you. Alara's face went chalk white. Theron realized what he had just said, but he didn't apologize. Instead, employing his usual tactic of burying his emotions in ice, he said, "I'm handling it, so stay out of it." "How can I stay out of it? Are we even a normal married couple?" That single sentence made Alara look at the small gift box on the table. The existence of the child she wanted to announce tonight rose in her throat and was violently swallowed back down. Theron noticed the cake. "What's this? Is it your birthday?" He looked at the wall as if trying to check a calendar. Alara couldn't laugh or cry. "What's in the box?" "Nothing." She quickly snatched the gift box. Theron reached out, but she dodged him. "Alara, don't open it." "Why?" "Because there's no reason to give it to you anymore." She clutched the box to her chest and ran up the stairs. Theron moved to follow her, but stopped. His eyes fell on the unlit candles sticking out of the melting cake on the table. That night, Alara shoved the baby booties into the deepest corner of her drawer, and she wrote a new rule in her notebook. Do not use a child to beg for love. A few days later, the Sterling family's grand Thanksgiving gathering arrived. Even though she felt physically ill, Alara had no choice but to attend. Corinne had called and said that half the East Coast socialite relatives were coming, so she needed to arrive at dawn to prep. "You must play the perfect hostess to protect Theron's image." "Yes, ma'am," Alara replied. The day before Thanksgiving, Vespera had called Theron incessantly. Theron ignored the calls but reviewed her texts. He already knew parts of Vespera's medical documents were suspicious. Her pregnancy was verified, but the timeline she claimed they were together didn't align. Theron had also ordered a covert corporate audit on Vespera's recent activities. His suspicions grew when he received a tip she had been meeting with rival equity firms, but he explained none of this to Alara. He figured he would tell her once he had concrete proof. He thought he was in control of the situation, so his wife simply needed to sit and wait. He had no idea what consequences his silence would bring. On Thanksgiving Day, Vespera announced her pregnancy in front of the entire Sterling dynasty. Theron chose to stay silent, calculating that a direct denial would tip Vespera off to destroy the corporate espionage evidence. To him, it was a strategic move, but to Alara, it was indistinguishable from a confession. After leaving her wedding ring on the dining table and walking out, Corinne chased after her. Alara, wait, Theron will explain. Alara untied her apron and draped it over a chair. Did you know Corinne? No, I swear I just heard it today. If that's true, do you believe me? This isn't about believing you. She said there's a child. We have to verify the facts first. Hearing that, Alara slowly nodded. Right. The child's existence must be verified while I am just expected to endure without any answers. Yes, Corinne. When I told you I thought Theron was still seeing Vespera, you told me I needed to be better. You told me to make the house warm and to never nag my husband. Corinne's face hardened. Did I say that because I hate you? I just wanted you to save your marriage. Why is saving the marriage always my job? The one wandering outside is Theron? Why is the one waiting by the door the only one who has to put in the effort? Corinne was at a loss for words. Just then, Theron walked into the foyer. We need to talk. Just the two of us. Alara asked without looking at him. Is it your child? It's not confirmed? Then why didn't you say no in front of everyone back there? It's complicated to explain right now. Again, later. Theron lowered his voice. Don't act on emotion right now. I'm handling it. Alara let out a hollow laugh. You're always handling everything on your own without telling me anything, without caring what I think. This isn't the time to act like this. What kind of place is this? Anyway, Alara looked back toward the grand hall. A place where your family's pride matters more than my soul. When Theron reached for her arm, Alara stepped back again. Don't touch me. Theron's hand fell. Alara looked straight at him. I'm not going back to Boston tonight. What are you talking about? I want to be alone. Running away won't solve anything. Staying here hasn't solved anything either. Alara grabbed her small overnight bag. In truth, since the night before, she had packed a change of clothes and her ID just in case. She had known that if Vespera actually brought this to the family estate, she wouldn't survive another night. Theron blocked the door. Where are you going? You don't need to know. Alara, you never once wondered where I was or what I was doing all day, did you? Don't start asking now. She shoved past him and walked out into the freezing Rhode Island air. The relatives stared at them from the dining hall, but Alara didn't lower her head. As she walked out the main gates, her legs shook and her chest felt tight. But she didn't stop. She hailed a cab to the train station and headed back to their Beacon Hill townhouse. She opened her closet and threw her few possessions into a suitcase. She hadn't brought much when she married: a few modest outfits, her baking tools, and a small photo album from her parents. When she pulled the box with the baby booties from the back of the drawer, her tears finally broke. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the box to her chest. I'm so sorry, she whispered to the baby. She hadn't even felt kick yet. Mom is so afraid she'll take your father away from you. But if I stay here, I feel like I'm going to disappear entirely. After crying until her eyes were swollen, she searched for legal aid clinics online. She decided not to file for divorce immediately. She didn't want him to claim she was being hysterical. She planned to flee to a safe place first, then communicate solely through a lawyer. She left a single post-it note on the marble kitchen island. I want to live apart for a while. I will contact you first. Please don't look for me. Her wedding ring was already sitting next to the Thanksgiving centerpiece in Newport. She turned her phone off and left the house. Initially, she considered going to her parents in the Berkshires, but she knew Theron would look there first, and her parents would likely panic and urge her to go back. With the help of a coworker from the bakery, she found a cheap month-to-month studio apartment in Camden, Maine, a quiet coastal town hours away. She texted Lorcan vaguely stating she had an emergency and wouldn't be able to work for a while. Lorcan didn't pry. He just replied, "If you need anything, just call." That night after Alara left, Theron had a vicious blowout with Vespera at his parents' estate. "Why did you come here?" he yelled. Vespera put on a tearful act. "Because you keep ignoring me. You wouldn't even commit to your own child in front of your family. If it's my child, we'll get a DNA test first." Vespera's expression hardened. Now you're questioning me. The timeline doesn't match up. Why are you lying? Theron glared at her with absolute zero warmth. I will find out. He immediately ordered his driver back to Boston. He figured that despite her anger, Alara would be at the townhouse. Over the last 2 years, no matter how badly he broke her, she always stayed in that house. When he unlocked the door, the townhouse was pitch black. Alara. No answer. He ran upstairs and threw open her closet. Her clothes were gone. The cheap drugstore moisturizer she kept on the vanity and the framed photo of her parents by the bed had vanished. He found the post-it on the kitchen island. His face turned rigid as he read the few scribbled words. He dialed her number, straight to voicemail. He called her parents in the Berkshires, but they said they hadn't seen her. His mother-in-law asked worriedly if something was wrong, but he lied and said it was just a work trip. Theron drove to the Hearthstone Bakehouse the next morning. Lorcan blocked the door. Where is she? I don't know. You expect me to believe that she has to have an emergency contact or a forwarding address. Lorcan's face turned cold. Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Theron suppressed the urge to swing. You're hiding another man's wife. Alara isn't anyone's property. Theron's eyes darkened. Lorcan didn't flinch. Before you go tearing the city apart looking for her, maybe try figuring out why she ran in the first place. Hearing that Theron still couldn't accept his own fault, he convinced himself Alara had just misunderstood Vespera's lies. He believed if he just laid out the corporate audit and the truth, she would come right back. He ordered his corporate security team and his assistant to track her down. But Alara hadn't used his credit card and she had swapped her SIM card. She had only withdrawn cash from her own bakery earnings. After a few days, Theron's anxiety mutated into explosive anger. He checked his phone during board meetings, and when he came home, he wandered aimlessly through the empty rooms. Traces of Alara were everywhere. In the fridge, meal prep containers had neat dated labels. In the laundry room, there was a sticky note detailing how to dry clean his specific Italian shirts. In the bathroom, her cheap lavender lotion still sat there. Theron stared at it for a long time, suddenly realizing he didn't even know what scent his wife preferred. On the 7th night, he was drinking scotch alone in his home office. Vespera kept calling, but he blocked her. The audit team finally delivered the report. Vespera had indeed met with rival investors and proprietary tech data had been leaked from Theron's division. Furthermore, the clinic logs proved the date Vespera claimed to have been with Theron was entirely fabricated. Theron now had concrete proof she was conning him, but he had absolutely no way to tell this to Alara. He carried the bottle of scotch upstairs to the master bedroom. While rummaging through the nightstand looking for a charger, he found a small black notebook jammed in the very back of the drawer. It was plain black. Initially, Theron assumed it was her grocery ledger. But when he opened the first page, his name was at the top. Things Theron hates. He accidentally read the next line. Don't call late at night. Don't ask if he's eating dinner first. Don't wait up with the porch light on. When spending money, pick the cheapest option. If I buy medicine, explain why first. Don't ask questions, even if Vespera calls him. If Theron is angry, don't ask why, just apologize first. Don't call my parents in the Berkshires too often. If I need to cry, don't cry where he can see me. Theron's finger froze. He flipped page after page. Every few dates, a new rule was added. The careless, cruel words he had spat at her over the years had been institutionalized as laws she had to survive by. Today I bought cold medicine and he called. Maybe he thinks I'm bleeding his money. Next time I'll just bear the pain. Baked a cake for our first anniversary. Theron said he had no intention of celebrating this marriage. Next time, don't invent a reason to celebrate. Vespera came to the house. I haven't seen him smile in so long. He never smiles like that when he's with me. Do not hope that if I endure this, he will eventually understand. Theron took a ragged breath. The corners of the pages were warped and stained, tear stains that had soaked the paper and dried. In the final pages, the handwriting was firmer. Got a job. Today, for the first time, someone wrote my name on a chalkboard. I felt like I wasn't invisible anymore. Theron came to the bakery. He doesn't understand why I work. He thinks I'm doing it for a paycheck. I need to make my own choices more than I need money. And on the very last page, a single devastating sentence. Do not use a child to beg for love. Theron read the sentence over and over. A child. Clutching the notebook, he frantically tore through the rest of her drawers. Inside an old handbag she rarely used, he found a crumpled receipt. A copay receipt from an OBGYN clinic. All the color drained from Theron's face. He crushed the receipt in his fist, paralyzed. The moment the possibility of Alara's pregnancy hit him, a barrage of memories rushed in the way she protectively covered her stomach during the Thanksgiving argument. The small gift box she had guarded so fiercely on his birthday, how sickly pale she had looked for weeks. He finally understood what she had tried to tell him that night. Theron collapsed onto the floor beside the bed. While he had been busy investigating Vespera's lies, his wife had gone to the clinic alone to confirm their baby. She had baked a cake and bought a gift to tell him the happy news, only for him to come home late from a hotel bar with Vespera. And when given one final desperate chance, he had sneered at her. "Are we even a normal married couple?" Theron buried his face in his hands. For the first time in his life, he was more terrified of what he was in Alara's eyes than the fact that he had been played by Vespera. The reason Alara wasn't coming back wasn't a simple misunderstanding. The problem wouldn't be fixed just because Vespera was gone. Alara was terrified of him. Without his explicit permission, she didn't even feel safe buying Tylenol. He had never considered himself an abusive man because he had never laid a hand on her. But in that notebook, Alara had been shrinking every single day, analyzing his micro-expressions and tone of voice just to survive. With shaking hands, Theron dialed her number again. Still off. He left a voicemail. "Alara." His voice cracked instantly. "You don't have to tell me where you are, and I won't demand you come back. Just, please, tell me you're safe." He choked on a sob, pausing for a long time. "I found your notebook. I know I shouldn't have read it, but I did." He squeezed his eyes shut. "I was always so angry because I thought you never communicated. But I realize now, it wasn't that you weren't speaking. It was that I refused to listen." Theron couldn't find the words to continue. For a man who had never genuinely apologized to anyone in his life, sorry felt violently insufficient. But it was the only word he had. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "And about the baby. If it's true, I swear I won't leave you to do this alone. But I'm not using this to force you back. Call me, whenever you're ready." He hung up. The silent, immaculate house felt like a tomb. He had always viewed Alara's quietness as convenience. Now he knew her silence wasn't peace. It was surrender. Meanwhile, in a drafty studio apartment in Camden, Maine, Alara stared at the voicemail notification on her new prepaid phone. She hadn't saved the number, but she knew who it was. She hovered her thumb over the play button, then pulled it away. Inside her, a tiny flutter, a movement she hadn't felt before, stirred. She wrapped her arms around her stomach and whispered, "Just wait a little longer." She knew that if she listened to his voice now, her resolve would crumble. She was terrified that one apology would erase years of agony, and she would crawl right back into her cage. Without listening to the message, she turned the screen off. Outside, the freezing New England rain lashed against the window. The room was small and cold, but here she didn't have to hold her breath listening for someone's footsteps. For the first time, she decided to make a choice purely for herself and her child. Verifying if Theron's remorse was genuine was a problem for later. What Alara needed now wasn't proof of how much Theron loved her, but the unshakable certainty that even if she wasn't loved, she could survive without breaking. It took Alara 3 days to finally listen to the voicemail. For 3 days, she sat by the frosty window staring at the phone. She feared hitting play would drag her back to the past. The man on the other end was the source of her deepest trauma, yet simultaneously the man she had so desperately wanted to love. She listened to it at dawn, woken by terrible morning sickness. Sipping ice water, she brought the phone to her ear. "Alara." The voice didn't sound like the Theron she knew. The always calculated, icy tone was ragged wrecked. He spoke of the notebook. He spoke of his realization that he was the monster who had silenced her. And when he finally said, "I'm sorry," Alara closed her eyes. It was the apology she had begged the universe for. She had prayed countless nights for him to understand her pain. But hearing it now didn't bring joy. A profound, searing grief hit her instead. "Why did you only realize it after I ran away? Why couldn't you see it when I was crying in the same house? Why are you only saying sorry after I've killed every last drop of hope and decided to raise this baby alone?" She tried, not to cry, but the tears flowed anyway. She held her stomach, focused on her breathing for an hour, and finally typed a single brief text message. "I am safe. The baby is healthy. From now on, please communicate only through my lawyer." When the message sent, her fingertips shook. It had taken an hour to write those 3 sentences. Theron didn't text back. If it had been the old Theron, he would have called immediately in a rage over being dismissed or sent private investigators to drag her home. But that night, the only call Alara received was from a Boston family law firm. Theron's retained attorney reached out formally, stating Theron's intent to discuss separation terms and future child support exactly according to Alara's wishes. They wouldn't have to meet in person, and all communication would be heavily mediated. Alara read the email repeatedly. She couldn't tell if Theron had actually changed or if this was just a highly sophisticated trap to corner her. She had to remain vigilant. An abuser can feel guilty for a few days. They can act like a saint for a few weeks. True change is proven by whether they can respect someone else's autonomy even when they are denied what they want. Elara visited a local legal aid society in Maine. In a cramped, fluorescent-lit office, a sharp-eyed lawyer named Rowena listened patiently to her recount her marriage, the financial coercion, the isolation, the emotional terrorism. "Did he ever hit you?" Rowena asked gently. Elara shook her head. "No. But he always made me feel like I was committing a crime. I had to justify buying Tylenol. I had to report everywhere I went. When he got mad, I had to apologize before I even knew what I did wrong. If I didn't, I couldn't breathe in that house." Rowena didn't dismiss her pain. Bruises aren't the only proof of abuse, Elara. Controlling your finances, isolating you from your family, keeping you in a state of constant walking on eggshells fear, that is textbook coercive control. It is abuse. Hearing a professional say that out loud silenced Elara. She had spent years believing she was just too sensitive or weak. Both her mother and her mother-in-law had drilled into her head that as long as her husband wasn't a violent drunk, she just needed to be a good patient wife. She had never felt entitled to the word victim because she didn't have black eyes to show for it. Rowena explained she didn't have to file for divorce today, but she needed to formalize the physical separation and secure her financial rights for the impending birth. Leaving the clinic, Elara felt for the first time that her reality had been validated without being minimized. Through Rowena, Elara set 3 conditions for Theron. First, he was prohibited from tracking her location or visiting her unannounced. Second, he could not use either side's parents to pressure her into returning. Third, he would not use the child as leverage to force a reconciliation. Theron agreed to every single term without a fight. He only had one counter request to pay for her OBGYN visits and the hospital delivery costs. In writing, he promised this financial support would not grant him any leverage over custody or her personal life. Initially, Elara refused. Taking his money felt like stepping right back into the financial cage. But Rowena firmly advised her that prenatal care and delivery were the legal and moral obligations of the father, not a charitable handout. Eventually, Elara agreed to let him cover the hospital bills only. She would pay her own rent and food. Theron did not argue. After Elara disappeared, Theron's meticulously structured life rapidly derailed. He went to the Boston headquarters, but he couldn't focus on spreadsheets or board meetings. His subordinates walked on eggshells, speaking only when spoken to. Normally, Theron would crucify an analyst for a typo, but when he blankly approved flawed reports without a word, the office atmosphere turned terrifying. Alistair summoned his son to his penthouse office. "Get your head straight, we have a company to run." Theron just stared out the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the harbor. "I found where Elara is." "Good. When are you dragging her back?" Theron slowly turned to his father. "I'm not bringing her back, Dad." Alistair's eyebrow twitched. "So she's going to throw a tantrum and come back when she's ready." "Nonsense, what if she doesn't?" Alistair slammed his palm on the mahogany desk. "She's pregnant. You're going to let the heir of the Sterling family be born in some shack." In the past, Theron wouldn't have batted an eye at the phrase heir of the Sterling family. But now it made his skin crawl. A child wasn't corporate property or a chess piece for succession. It was the baby Elara was going to risk her life to bring into the world. "Dad, yes, it's my child too. But that doesn't give me the right to dictate Elara's life." Alistair looked at his son like he had lost his mind. "What sort of brainwashing did that girl pull on you to make you act like this?" "She didn't say a damn thing," Theron replied quietly. "I'm just finally looking at the monster I've been." "What exactly did you do that's so unforgivable? The rumor about you having a kid with Vespera was a lie. You didn't beat her. You didn't stash a mistress in a condo. What is the great sin here? You've always thought that way," Theron said bitterly. "That's why you shoved this marriage down her throat, isn't it?" Alistair's face went rigid. Theron spoke with crystal clarity, for the first time in his life. "You hijacked Elara's future under the guise of repaying a life debt to her father. And I punished her every single day because I was too much of a coward to rebel against you. I just wanted my perfect, stable empire, and I forced Elara to be the human sacrifice that held it together." Alistair was stunned into silence. Theron announced he was stepping down from the succession timeline. He recused himself from all executive decisions pending a federal audit, and he voluntarily submitted all of Vespera's corporate espionage files, along with his own emails to an external forensics firm. Alistair was livid. "If you step down now, the board will eat you alive. Vespera, stealing data, is on her, not you. She had access because of me. That is my responsibility. Theron gave a hollow smile. I used to think exactly like you. If something went wrong, it was someone else's fault. If I destroyed my wife, it was your fault for forcing the marriage. He stood up. I'm done running from my own wreckage. Simultaneously with his corporate demotion, Theron began intense psychotherapy. The first time he sat in the therapist's leather chair, he didn't understand why he was there. He thought people who needed anger management were guys who punched holes in drywall. The therapist asked him what he felt when Alara didn't obey his preferences. I felt disrespected. Like when she said she wanted to work at that bakery. She didn't consult me. Why did she need to consult you? Theron started to say it was obvious, but stopped. Because we're married. Discussing a career as equals is different from asking a master for permission. Which one did you expect from her? Theron couldn't answer. Through therapy, Theron began to dissect the rotting core of his psyche. It wasn't just that he didn't love Alara. He had never viewed her as an autonomous human being. She was merely a rogue variable disrupting his perfectly curated life. When she said she wanted to work, he saw it as an insult to his wealth. When she said she was lonely, he saw it as a needy demand. Once he categorized her as a nuisance, nothing she did could ever be right. Theron didn't tell Alara he was in therapy. He refused to use his self-improvement as a bargaining chip to win her back. His transformation couldn't be a performance to earn a reward. Meanwhile, Alara lived a quiet, peaceful life in Maine through her second trimester. Once her health stabilized, she desperately wanted to return to work. But commuting from Maine to Boston was impossible. Lorcan called and offered to help her find an apartment near the bakery in Cambridge so she could get her old job back. Alara felt a spike of anxiety. Lorcan, you're getting a bit too involved in my personal life. Lorcan immediately backed off. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I didn't mean I would pay for it or co-sign. I was just going to give you the broker's number we use for our staff. He texted her the number. The choice is entirely yours, Alara. Those words struck a chord. The choice is yours. The realization that someone could offer help without demanding control in return was profoundly healing. Ultimately, Alara decided not to move back to Boston. Instead, she rented a tiny commercial kitchen space in Camden and launched an online bakery. She sourced wild elderberries, maple, and apples from her parents' farm in the Berkshires to craft small-batch artisanal sweets. Initially, she barely had 3 orders a week, but regulars from Hearthstone in Boston heard the news and started ordering online. Lorcan promoted Alara's new business on his bakery's Instagram, but he didn't brand it as a subsidiary of his shop. He explicitly highlighted it as her independent venture. Alara named her brand Winter's End Confections. It wasn't a brand about a prince coming to save her from the cold, but about surviving the harshest freeze alone and blooming on her own terms. Her days found a steady rhythm, but Vespera wasn't finished. When the federal audit ripped through the company, Vespera claimed she was being framed because of her pregnancy. She spun a narrative to the East Coast elite that Theron had strung her along, and that even after marrying the country girl, he couldn't stay away from her. Simultaneously, Vespera leaked rumors that the true culprit behind the corporate espionage was Alara. Her claim was that Alara, as the wife, had unchecked access to Theron's home office and laptop. She alleged Alara had stolen trade secrets and fled the state to avoid prison. A few days later, a vicious, anonymous blind item went viral on a major Boston gossip blog. Billionaire's gold-digger wife steals corporate data, runs off with hipster baker lover. The post didn't use real names, but anyone in the New England scene knew exactly who it meant. It even hinted at Lorcan and the Cambridge bakery. The rumor caught fire. Winter's End Confections was review-bombed to hell. Massive catering orders were canceled overnight. Someone shipped a box of her pastries back filled with trash, and one local customer called Alara, screaming that she wouldn't feed a thief's garbage to her kids. When the call ended, Alara stood paralyzed in her tiny kitchen. She knew she hadn't stolen a dime, but against the internet mob, the truth was defenseless. If she spoke up, she'd be accused of airing the Sterling's dirty laundry. If she stayed quiet, it looked like an admission of guilt. Lorcan suggested they sue the blog for defamation. Alara hesitated. If I make a move, it becomes a media circus. It's already out of control. Your bakery is taking hits because of me, Lorcan. That's not your fault, Alara. That's exactly what they want you to think, Lorcan said firmly. That afternoon, Rowena called. The Sterling Corporation had formally handed the data breach over to the FBI, and Alara might be subpoenaed as a witness. Alara couldn't breathe. Her first thought was, did Theron throw me under the bus? To protect his family's stock price and legacy had he sacrificed her? But Rowena quickly added, the one who handed the dossier to the feds was Theron, but he didn't implicate you. He explicitly demanded an investigation into Vespera Thorne and internal board members. He even surrendered evidence that technically hurts his own case to protect you. Hurts his case. He admitted on federal record that you had unrestricted access to the unencrypted laptops at home. But he provided the IP logs and security timestamps, proving you never logged in. The logs prove a remote backdoor was used by Vespera's associates. Alara was stunned. Why would he go that far? Admitting gross negligence meant Theron was opening himself up to federal fines and permanent removal from the board. Weeks later, during her formal interview with the authorities in Boston, Alara stated she had cleaned the home office but never touched the files. The agents didn't press her. The forensic IP data had already pinpointed Vespera's shell accounts. Leaving the federal building, Alara saw Theron standing on the sidewalk. He wore a sharp black overcoat standing next to his lawyer. He looked gaunt, like he hadn't slept in weeks. As Alara walked out, Theron instinctively took a step toward her, but caught himself. He stayed a respectful distance away. "Why didn't you warn me? I'd be subpoenaed," Alara asked. "I had my lawyer inform yours," Theron said carefully. "Did you think I framed you?" "No." The answer came out instantly. "Then why did you hand over logs that incriminated your own security negligence? If I hid it, the feds would have dug deeper and suspected you more. Leaving classified data unsecured in my house was my failure, not yours." Alara stared at him. The old Theron would have blamed the IT department or spun the PR. Now, though she didn't fully trust him, he didn't look like a man running from the fire. Theron asked softly, "Are you feeling okay?" His eyes darted to her heavily pregnant stomach, then quickly snapped back to her face. He didn't step closer, and he certainly didn't try to touch her. "I'm fine. The smear blogs are being scrubbed. We're tracking the IP of the original author." Alara's face hardened. "You didn't just pay them off with sterling money, did you?" "No. Everything is going through the courts. I know just deleting the posts doesn't fix the damage. You and Lorcan lost a lot of business. You don't understand." Alara's voice trembled. "You can just walk into another C-suite job. People will always bow to you because you're a sterling. But the business I built from nothing was destroyed in a day. People believe I'm a scheming gold digger who targeted a rich man because I grew up on a farm." Theron offered no excuses. "Tell me how to fix it. Do absolutely nothing." Alara's voice was steel. "If you swoop in and save my bakery with your money, they'll just say I only survived because of my billionaire husband." Theron went silent, then nodded. "Understood. I won't interfere with your business, but I will make sure Vespera rots in federal prison for the wire fraud. It's not a favor to you. It's simply what I have to do." Alara didn't say thank you. It was his mess to clean up. They parted ways right there on the pavement. Following that, Theron presented the unredacted audit to the Sterling Board of Directors. He confessed he had bypassed security protocols due to personal entanglement with Vespera. The board slapped him with a massive fine, revoked his bonuses, and issued a 6-month suspension. Alistair was apoplectic. "Why would you confess publicly? We could have buried this," Theron replied. "If we bury it, the stain on Alara's name never fully washes off. For the good of the company, sometimes you have to look the other way." Because of that exact mentality, parasites like Vespera almost destroyed us. Corinne tried to call Alara directly, but Theron confiscated her phone. "If you call her, you're just going to guilt-trip her into coming back. I just want to see how my grandchild is doing. Then ask through her lawyer." Corinne was deeply offended. "You're alienating your wife from her own family." Theron looked at his mother with dead eyes. "The one who alienated Alara wasn't me. It was all of us." Corinne paled. Recovering the online bakery sales was brutal. However, Lorcan and the team in Boston didn't waver. They didn't patronize Alara by buying her stock out of pity. Instead, they networked with better logistics suppliers and connected her to organic packaging vendors, giving her the tools to be entirely self-sufficient. Alara didn't post a sob story on her website. She refused to monetize her trauma or the Sterling scandal. Instead, she just wrote honestly about the rugged Berkshire soil, the farmers who grew her ingredients, and the authentic taste of survival. Slowly, the orders returned. Customers who had believed the gossip saw the FBI indictments on the news and sent apology emails with their orders. Some worried she was working too hard in her 3rd trimester. Alara replied to the comments gracefully. She knew she wasn't fully healed. Her heart still hammered wildly if she saw a Boston area code, and her instinct to apologize for existing flared up when anyone raised their voice. But she now recognized those trauma responses as old ghosts, not her current reality. In her 8th month of pregnancy, while hauling a crate of apples, a blinding pain tore through Alara's abdomen. She thought it was just Braxton Hicks, but the pain escalated and she noticed blood on the floor. Lorcan, who was visiting to drop off supplies, immediately called an ambulance. At the local main hospital, she was diagnosed with imminent preterm labor. The doctors ordered strict bed rest warning. They might need to perform an emergency C-section. Receiving the terrifying news from Rowena Theron drove straight from Boston to Maine at 90 miles an hour. But when he arrived at the maternity ward, he didn't barge in. He sat in a plastic chair at the far end of the hallway, waiting for Alara's explicit permission. Corinne and Alistair demanded to fly up via helicopter, but Theron threatened to have security bar them. "Our grandchild could be in danger. How can we just sit here?" Corinne wept. "The last thing Alara needs right now is a spike in her blood pressure," Theron said coldly. "Are you saying we are a disease to her?" Alistair roared. Theron didn't back down. "Yes." Hours later, a nurse came out and relayed a message. "The patient says one support person can come in." Theron stood up terrified. "Does she mean me?" The nurse nodded. When he walked into the sterile room, Alara was ghostly pale, strapped to fetal heart monitors. Theron sat in a chair furthest from the bed. "Are you okay?" Alara stared at the ceiling. "They're observing me for a few days. If you need anything," Alara cut him off. "If I crash and need emergency surgery, do not let your parents make medical decisions for me." Theron's jaw tightened. "Understood. Don't let your family dictate the baby's name or where we live." "I won't." Alara looked at him. "Because I will decide." "I know." Theron didn't hesitate. A heavy silence followed. Alara asked quietly, "Why were you sitting out in the hall?" "Because you might not have wanted to look at me. The old you would have kicked the door down." Theron looked at the linoleum floor. "The old me only cared about what I wanted." Hearing that, Alara turned her face to the window. Theron did absolutely nothing in that hospital room. He didn't try to hold her hand. He didn't beg for a second chance. He just poured her ice water when she needed it and stepped into the hallway when the nurses checked her vitals. When night fell and she drifted off to sleep, he quietly left the room and spent the entire night sitting in the freezing corridor chair. 3 days later, the contractions stopped, and Alara was discharged on bed rest. Theron didn't offer his luxury SUV. Lorcan and Rowena arrived to take her home. Theron just watched the car drive away from the parking lot. He knew a few days of decent behavior didn't erase years of abuse. He used to think one grand romantic gesture could fix everything. Now he realized that proving you've changed is an agonizing, microscopic daily choice to respect boundaries. Around this time, the federal case against Vesper Thorne concluded. Her ultrasound photo was real, but the father was a junior analyst at a rival hedge fund. She had planned to use the baby to extort Theron into a massive divorce settlement and siphon Sterling's stock. She was indicted for securities fraud, corporate espionage, and defamation. The East Coast tabloids had a field day. Theron's past with Vespera, the explosive Thanksgiving, and the FBI raid were front-page news. Alistair's army of lawyers tried to silence the press. But Theron ordered them to stand down. Only correct factual legal errors. "Do not suppress the story. You want to air our dirty laundry to the world," Alistair hissed. "I let Vespera run rampant, and I emotionally abandoned my wife," Theron said. "If I admit to it, my ego takes a hit. But Alara almost lost her livelihood and her sanity because of my perfect reputation." Theron didn't do a PR tour. He didn't use his repentance as a marketing tool. He simply paid his federal fines and accepted the public humiliation quietly. Alara felt nothing reading the articles. Vespera going to prison brought a grim satisfaction, but it didn't heal her heart. Society loved the narrative of the evil mistress destroying the innocent marriage. But Alara knew the truth. Even if Vespera had never existed, Theron hadn't respected her. Vespera's lies didn't excuse the financial abuse, the coldness, the absolute control Theron had wielded. Time marched on, and her due date arrived. During a routine checkup, her water broke. Though slightly early, the baby was strong enough for delivery. As the brutal contractions began, Alara texted Rowena Lorcan, and after a long hesitation, "Theron, the baby is coming." Theron made it to the main hospital in less than 2 hours. Outside the delivery ward, he asked Alara directly if he was allowed in. Alara breathed through a contraction thought for a second and nodded. "Just stand over there. Don't say anything." "Okay." As the pain peaked, Alara crushed the bed rails. Theron wanted to reach out and hold her, but he locked his arms at his sides. Only when Alara blindly reached out and grabbed his sleeve did he carefully slide his hand into hers. Hours later, the piercing cry of a newborn echoed through the room. A perfectly healthy baby boy. When the nurse placed the baby on Alara's chest, she broke down, sobbing. Theron's eyes were wet, but he didn't push forward to claim the child. He just stood back, watching Alara kiss the screaming infant's head. "Do you have a name?" he asked softly. "Orion Vance." Theron was visibly stunned. The child bore Alara's maiden name, not Sterling. Yet he didn't argue. It's a strong name. Alara wiped her eyes. You aren't going to fight me on it. You said I'd decide. He's your son. You carried him alone, you built a life for him alone, and you're holding him first. My right to be a father is something I have to earn through my actions from this day forward. Fresh tears spilled from Alara's eyes. Not from a magical rekindling of romance, but from the overwhelming relief that for the first time in her life, a man had not robbed her of her agency. Before Alara left the hospital, Theron signed a bulletproof legal custody agreement drafted by Rowena. It stipulated Theron would respect Alara's residence-only visit on pre-approved days and enforce a strict no-contact order against his parents regarding the child's upbringing. He waived his right to sue for primary custody and agreed to pay child support exactly to the state's maximum formula. No more, no less. So there could be no financial manipulation. Corinne came to the hospital to see her grandson and nearly fainted when she saw the birth certificate, said Orion Vance. Theron, he's your flesh and blood. He has to have the Sterling name. Before Alara could even tense up, Theron cut his mother off. That was Alara's decision, Mom. It's final. But this isn't up for debate. Corinne looked at her son's lethal glare, then at Alara, and finally snapped her mouth shut. It was the first time Alara had ever seen Theron shield her from his family's toxicity. But it wasn't enough to magically open the gates to her heart. A month after Orion's birth, Theron met Alara to hand over the final federal closure documents regarding Vespera. They sat across from each other in Rowena's sterile conference room. Theron explained that Vespera was serving time and the bloggers who defamed Alara were facing civil ruin. I'm pushing the Boston journals to print retractions to clear your name completely. Alara looked down at the files. Even with her in prison, our problems aren't solved, Theron. Everyone says you just made a mistake because of a crazy woman, that she ruined our perfect marriage. Theron said nothing. Alara looked right through him. But Vespera didn't live in our house. The person who made me justify buying my doll, the person who belittled my baking, the person who looked right through me like I was a ghost. That wasn't Vespera. That was you. Theron turned ashen. I know. Do you really? Even if she never existed, I was a monster to you. Alara held her breath. It was the first time Theron hadn't deployed a caveat. I used to tell myself I was awful to you because I was madly in love with her. I blamed my father for forcing the marriage. But looking back, I chose every single cruel thing I did to you. He clasped his hands together tightly. I know you'll never forgive me. And I don't expect us to play happy family just because Orion is here. Alara's eyes brimmed with tears, but they didn't fall. Then why do you keep apologizing, not to earn your forgiveness? Theron looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Just to admit out loud that I can never, ever erase what I did to you? A suffocating silence filled the room. Alara couldn't deny that Theron had fundamentally changed. But acknowledging a change and trusting someone enough to love them again were two entirely different universes. She packed her bag. Rowena will email you the visitation schedule for Orion. Theron nodded. As Alara reached the door, he said, Thank you. She stopped. For what? For not entirely terminating my right to be a father. I didn't do it for you, Alara said coldly. I did it because one day Orion might want to know who his father is. I know. Theron absorbed the blow without flinching. Alara walked out. The stark winter sunlight hit her face. She walked to her car, driving back to the small Maine town where her son waited. Could Theron maintain this? Would he revert in a year she didn't know? And she refused to bet her life on it. She would raise Orion, scale her business, and live as Alara Vance. Theron could wait outside her door for the rest of his life, but whether that door opened was entirely up to her. The first year of Orion's life was the longest and shortest year Alara ever experienced. The early months were a blur of screaming midnight feedings and chronic exhaustion. She would stay up all night rocking him, only to face a mountain of pastry orders at dawn. Her body was shattered, but strangely she felt lighter than she ever did in the Boston penthouse. She didn't have to read anyone's mood. She didn't have to explain what she was eating from her own fridge. No one screamed at her for leaving a lamp on. If Orion cried, she rocked him. If she broke down, she sat on the kitchen floor and cried freely. She leased the ground floor of a quaint rustic building near the Camden Harbor. The front was her commercial bakery, Winter's End, and the back was her studio apartment. While Orion napped in his bassinet, she kneaded sourdough and whisked elderberry glazes. Her business exploded locally. She partnered with organic farmers in the Berkshires to source heritage grains and wild berries. She didn't use the Sterling scandal to sell cookies. Her labels were simple. Wild elderberry. Harvested in the Berkshires. Baked in Maine. The quiet authenticity won people over. Lorcan visited Maine occasionally to check in. He adored Orion, but never tried to overstep into a paternal role. When he saw her flooded with holiday orders, he said, "You're drowning, Alara. You need to hire staff." "I know, but taking on payroll is terrifying." "Then don't hire full-time. Find local moms who want flexible gig work." Alara nodded. "The choice is mine, right?" Lorcan grinned. "You don't even need to ask anymore." Through a local women's shelter network, she hired 2 part-time assistants, Anna, a mom returning to the workforce, and Rachel, a recently divorced woman trying to stand on her own feet. Initially, both women were terrified of making mistakes. When Anna burned a tray of tarts, she braced herself to be fired, apologizing frantically. Seeing Anna cower, Alara saw her past self. Just because you make a mistake doesn't mean your existence is a burden. Alara calmly scraped the burnt tarts into the bin. "We just adjust the oven temp and try again. If you're confused, ask me. I don't want anyone in this kitchen suffering in silence because they're afraid of me." "You're not mad?" Anna asked weakly. Alara smiled softly. "I'm annoyed about the butter cost, but being annoyed doesn't give me the right to terrorize you." Saying it aloud, Alara realized how much she had healed. She used to structure her life around avoiding male anger. Now she knew that even if someone is angry, they are still responsible for how they treat people. Theron only visited on the exact days dictated by the custody contract, the first and third Saturdays of the month from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. He always parked his SUV 10 minutes early but never knocked. He waited inside his car until Alara opened the front door. The first few times, Orion screamed because Theron was a stranger. Theron panicked but never forced the baby into his arms. He would sit on the rug, roll a wooden block, and wait for Orion to come to him. The day Orion finally waddled over and grabbed Theron's index finger, Theron froze like a statue for 20 minutes. "Why aren't you moving?" Alara asked. "If I move, he might let go," Theron whispered. Theron never tried to buy Alara's affection during these visits. He didn't bring her Tiffany jewelry or extravagant bouquets. When Orion needed a new car seat or winter gear, Theron asked for an Amazon link and paid for it separately from his mandated child support. If Orion was sick with a fever, he offered to pay for a private pediatrician, but only visited if Alara explicitly gave him the green light. It was agonizing for Theron. For a billionaire executive used to bulldozing his way to solutions, waiting for permission was psychological torture. But he had learned the hard way that his anxiety didn't give him the right to violate Alara's peace. Back in Boston, after his suspension, the board offered Theron his C-suite empire back. Alistair expected him to take the reins of the conglomerate. Instead, Theron transferred to the Industrial Safety and Logistics Division, a grueling, unglamorous field operations role. The sight of the sterling air in steel-toed boots, walking factory floors, and listening to union complaints shocked the corporate world. People whispered it was a PR stunt, but Theron genuinely listened. He knew he had spent his life making arrogant assumptions without hearing the people on the ground. During a heated union meeting, a line worker screamed at him, "You suits always blame us for safety breaches, but you're the ones who cut our operating budget by 20% to pad your bonuses." The old Theron would have fired the man on the spot for insubordination. Instead, Theron let him finish, took notes, and audited the factory's safety budget. He found the exact directive he had signed years ago that slashed safety protocols for profit. He wrote a blistering report implicating himself as the root cause. Alistair was furious. "Why the hell would you put your own negligence in writing?" "Because I signed it. I am responsible." Theron also continued his weekly therapy. One day his therapist asked, "Do you want Alara to love you again?" Theron stared at his hands. "More than anything." And if she never does, Theron exhaled a shaky breath. "I used to think that if I bled enough to show I changed, she owed me a second chance. Now, I know giving me a chance is entirely her prerogative. My responsibility is to not be a monster regardless of what she decides." "How long will it take for you to truly accept that?" "I don't know." Theron smiled bitterly. "Sometimes I feel a sick sense of entitlement. I think, I'm doing all this work, why won't she even look at me? But I keep my mouth shut. Because the second I demand a reward for basic human decency, I become her abuser all over again." As Orion's first birthday approached, the families clashed. Alara wanted a quiet, intimate smash cake party in the backyard of her bakery, but Alistair insisted on renting out the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Boston. He is the firstborn grandson of the Sterling Empire. Board members and senators need to be there. Theron told his father to back off and respect Alara's plans. Alistair scoffed. "The kid has her last name, and now we have to celebrate like peasants in a backyard." "It's Orion's mother's backyard," Theron growled. "Dad, how much longer are you going to live like a tyrant?" Alistair assumed Alara was manipulating his son. He ordered Corinne to go to Maine and talk some sense into her. Corinne had evolved over the last year, too. Originally, she thought Alara was just being vindictive. But one day, she found a notepad in Alara's old kitchen in Boston. It was a terrifyingly detailed master list of every Sterling relative's dietary restrictions, allergies, seating preferences, and favorite wines. It was unpaid, grueling, emotional labor that Alara managed flawlessly. Corinne realized she had treated Alara like a high-end servant, rewarding her with designer bags as long as she stayed quiet and endured Theron's cruelty. A week before the birthday, Corinne showed up at the Camden Bakery. She didn't barge in. She stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes before lightly tapping the glass. When Alara opened the door, Corinne didn't cross the threshold. "I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced." Alara was stunned. "Corinne, is something wrong? Could we talk for just a minute?" Alara hesitated, then led her to the small patio in the back. Corinne looked desperately at Orion in his playpen but didn't demand to hold him. "I didn't come to force the Ritz-Carlton party on you," Corinne said softly, setting her Birkin bag on the gravel. "I always thought I was a wonderful mother-in-law to you. I defended you from the snobby aunts. I bought you nice things. But every time you begged for help with Theron, I told you to just bear it. I told you to keep the marriage together." Alara said nothing. "I couldn't handle the idea that I raised a cruel son. So I made it your fault. If you just tried harder, my illusion of a perfect family wouldn't break." Corinne wiped a tear from her cheek. "I am so deeply sorry, Alara." The apology hit Alara like a physical weight. For years, she had fantasized about her in-laws begging for forgiveness, but hearing it didn't rewind time. "I never thought you hated me," Corinne Alara said slowly. "That was what made it so insidious. You told me you loved me like a daughter, but you constantly asked me to sacrifice my sanity to protect Theron's ego." Corinne bowed her head. "I wanted to be a good daughter-in-law so badly. I didn't want the East Coast elite calling me a gold digger, so I couldn't say no. You don't ever have to say yes to us again." Corinne wept. "I know, I won't." Alara's tone was icy, but Corinne didn't flinch. Corinne pulled a small envelope from her coat. "This isn't a gift for the baby. You can throw it away if you want." It wasn't a check or a trust fund deed. It was a faded Polaroid, a photo of a young Theron and a little Alara by the creek in the Berkshires. Theron's knees covered in mud as Alara laughed, holding the hem of her overalls. Alara stared at it for a long time. "I found it in the estate archives. I was going to burn it, but I figured it belongs to you." Corinne stood up. "I'll only come to the birthday party if I'm invited as a guest. If you don't want me there, I won't come." Alara thought for a moment. "You can come, but absolutely no talk of corporate succession or family legacy around Orion. I swear it." Orion's first birthday was held exactly as Alara wanted, a rustic warm gathering in the bakery's coastal backyard. Alara baked a stunning two-tiered woodland smash cake. Her parents drove up from the Berkshires, bringing a handmade quilt. Lorcan and the bakery staff arrived with balloons. Theron arrived 2 hours early. He wore a simple flannel and jeans, hauling tables and stringing up fairy lights. He didn't act like the lord of the manor. He acted like hired help, moving only where Alara directed him. Orion was crawling wildly through the grass. When Theron extended his arms, Orion paused, then grabbed Theron's knee and pulled himself up. A breathtakingly genuine smile broke across Theron's face. Alara watched them from the porch. In the past, seeing that smile would have made her desperate for his love. Now she just felt a profound relief that Theron could be a safe father for her son. It didn't mean he had to be her husband. Halfway through the party, Alistair arrived. He rolled in with an entourage, 2 corporate board members, and a handful of wealthy socialites. Corinne hissed at her husband, asking what the hell he was doing, but Alistair brushed her off. "It's my first grandson's birthday. It's a networking opportunity." Alara's face turned to stone. Theron marched up to his father. "We agreed on family only. These men are practically family." "I didn't authorize this." Alara stepped forward, her voice ringing clear across the yard. The chatter died. Alistair scoffed. "What's the harm in a few extra gifts?" Before the cake cutting, Alistair obnoxiously tapped his champagne glass. "Today we celebrate the first birthday of the Sterling Empire's future. Even though he currently bears his mother's surname, Sterling blood cannot be erased. Someday this boy will take the helm of our company." "Enough, Dad!" Alara shouted. Everyone froze. Alistair glared at her. "Excuse me?" Alara stepped right into the billionaire's personal space. "This is a 1-year-old's birthday party, not a shareholder meeting. You do not get to dictate my son's future." I am his grandfather. I speak for his legacy. Being his grandfather doesn't mean you own his soul. The coastal wind whipped Alara's hair. I sacrificed my youth and my sanity to pay off a life debt to you. I will not let you shackle my son with the same chains. Alistair's face went purple. After all the millions we spent on your father's heart surgery, on your lifestyle, Dad Theron's voice shattered the tension like a gunshot. He stepped right in front of Alistair, shielding Alara and holding Orion tight. Stop talking. You're siding with this hysterical woman. I'm stopping a tyrant. Theron looked at the socialites, staring at them. Orion is not the Sterling heir. I don't even know if I'm taking the CEO role. My son's future is none of your business. Alistair sneered. You're going to hand a multi-billion-dollar empire to strangers. You grew up eating off silver spoons because of this company. Exactly, Theron didn't flinch. Because I was your son, I thought owning people was my birthright. I thought I could crush anyone who inconvenienced me. He briefly glanced back at Alara. And because of that arrogance, I destroyed the best thing I ever had. Alara held her breath. Theron looked dead into his father's eyes. I refuse to infect Orion with that sickness. Whether this kid wants to be a baker, a farmer in the Berkshires, or absolutely nothing at all, he will do it free of this family's blood money. Alistair, humiliated in front of his peers, stormed out of the yard. His entourage awkwardly shuffled out behind him. The yard was suffocated by awkward silence. Then Silas Vance clapped his hands loudly. All right, who's ready for cake? The boy of the hour is getting hungry. The tension broke. People laughed and returned to their seats. During the traditional birthday game, where the baby picks an object predicting his future, a stethoscope, a dollar bill, a book, Orion ignored all the props and lunged face first into Alara's frosting. Looks like he's going to take over his mom's bakery, Lorcan cheered. Alara laughed, wiping vanilla bean frosting off her son's nose. No, he just likes sugar. Theron, standing nearby, nodded. It's the most honest choice. As the sun set over the main harbor, the guests trickled out. Corinne offered to do the dishes, but Alara told her the staff had it covered. Theron stayed until the very end, folding the rented chairs and bagging the trash. When the yard was entirely empty, Theron walked to his SUV and pulled out a small box. He approached Alara on the porch. This isn't for Orion. Alara looked at the box warily. Then what is it? Inside the box was her black notebook. Alara's blood ran cold. The ledger of her trauma. The rules she had bled over. Why are you giving this back to me now? It didn't feel right for me to keep it. Alara took it. It felt thicker than before. Did you write in this? Just the last few pages? Alara flipped to the back. In Theron's sharp architectural handwriting, a new set of rules had been documented. Expecting a woman to wait up all night is not a marriage, it's a hostage situation. Weaponizing financial security isn't providing, it's coercive control. Demanding blind trust without communication is demanding submission. Alara's escape wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of survival. My remorse does not entitle me to her forgiveness. Every sentence had a date next to it, chronicling months of grueling realizations in his therapist's office. On the final page, a single line stood out. Being a safe person is infinitely more important than saying, I love you. Alara couldn't close the notebook. She stared at the ink. You don't have to say anything, Theron said quietly. If I said I didn't hope this would impress you, I'd be lying. I wanted you to see that I'm trying. But I swear to God, I am not showing you this to beg you to take me back. Alara closed the book and put it in the box. I know you've changed, Theron. Theron's eyes wavered. But even knowing you've changed, I don't know if I can ever love you again. Theron nodded slowly. I know. When you look at me, you still see the man who threw your anniversary cake in the trash. The man who brought Vespera into our living room. The man who asked you why you deserved a seat at my table. The agony in his voice was palpable, but he offered zero excuses. Forgiving you doesn't erase those memories, Theron. It shouldn't erase them. Are you okay? No, Alara said honestly. But you don't get to erase my memory just so you can feel less guilty. Theron looked at her. Standing under the string lights of her bakery, he looked nothing like the icy corporate prince from their wedding day. But Alara no longer judged men by fleeting expressions of vulnerability. Can I just stay by your side as Orion's father as long as I follow your rules? Theron asked. By my side, Alara didn't give an immediate answer. Theron didn't push. From inside the bakery, Anna poked her head out. Alara, should we scrub the ovens tonight or leave it for the morning shift? Alara walked inside to check. There was a massive batch of sourdough that needed to be prepped for the morning rush. Because of the party, they were hours behind. Theron stood at the threshold of the back door looking in. Can I help? The old Theron would have just walked in and commandeered the kitchen. This Theron stood at the door waiting for clearance. Alara looked at the mountain of flour and boxes. She could do it herself, but it would take until 3 a.m. She pointed to a spare canvas apron hanging on the wall. "Wash your hands first." Theron stared at her. "I can come in." "To work." "Yes." "Right." He took off his boots and stepped into her domain. Alara showed him how to weigh the dough. Theron was clumsy. His first batch of sourdough was overworked and dense. When she told him to scrap it and start over, he didn't sigh or complain. He just dumped it and started again. "Is this enough hydration?" he asked. "Add a splash, more water. But only as much as I tell you. Don't go rogue." Theron chuckled, a low, genuine sound. "I can do that. I've had a lot of practice recently. Not going rogue." Alara looked at him, and a microscopic, almost invisible smile touched her lips. It wasn't full forgiveness. It certainly wasn't a promise of reconciliation. It was simply the very first moment the two of them had shared a space as equals, without anyone violating the other's boundaries. Late into the night, rows of perfectly scored bread rested on the cooling racks. Theron folded the shipping boxes, while Alara printed the shipping labels. Orion was fast asleep in his crib in the adjoining room. When the work was done, Theron took off the flour-dusted apron. "I'll head out now." Alara nodded by the door. As he stepped out into the freezing Maine night, he looked back. He looked like he wanted to say 1,000 things, but he swallowed them all. "I can come next Saturday at 1 p.m., right? Be here at 1 p.m. I won't be late opening the door." As Theron turned to walk to his car, Alara called out, "Theron." He stopped and looked back. Alara hesitated. "Thank you for defending me against Alistair today." Theron's eyes locked onto hers. "It was the bare minimum of what I owed you. I can still say thank you, can't I?" She gave a very slow, guarded smile. "Yeah, you can. Good night." "Good night, Alara." Alara left the door open and watched him walk across the gravel to his SUV. Unlike the old days, Theron didn't look back to see if she was watching, hoping she'd changed her mind. He just got in his car and drove away. Only when his taillights disappeared down the coastal road did Alara close the door. She walked back into her warm kitchen. She opened the black notebook one last time. The draconian rules she had written in her darkest days, and the frantic confessions Theron had written in his, shared the same spine. She picked up a pen and flipped to the very last blank page. After a year of writing nothing, she wrote a single sentence. "To love someone, I must not lose myself." Beneath it, she added one final line. "Whether I ever open this door again is entirely up to me." Alara closed the notebook. She didn't promise that Theron would one day be her husband again. She didn't say she had completely made peace with the past. Would they ever share a home and a last name again? No one knew. But racing to the finish line of the story wasn't important anymore. Theron needed time to prove he could wait in the cold, and Alara needed time to ensure she would never doubt her own heart again. Orion needed a love that was safe and honest, not a love built on parental guilt or the suffocating weight of a billionaire's legacy. Alara walked into the bedroom and tucked the quilt around her sleeping son. Orion, with his tiny fists thrown up by his head, breathed in a soft, steady rhythm. She kissed his forehead and cracked the window open. The crisp, freezing air of the Maine coast blew into the apartment, mixing with the rich, warm scent of baked bread. In the distance, the faint rumble of Theron's engine faded into the night. She didn't try to chase the sound. She didn't have to trap people who wanted to leave, and she didn't have to instantly welcome people who wanted to return. Love wasn't about surrendering your soul out of the terror of being abandoned. It was about guarding your own fences, taking brutal accountability for the damage you cause, and having the grace to stand outside in the cold until the other person feels safe enough to unlock the deadbolt. The door would never be battered down from the outside again. When it opened, it would be opened from the inside by a hand that felt completely, undeniably safe. And now that hand belonged solely to Alara Vance.